Hello, welcome everybody. We are here, we are streaming, and we are excited that you're joining us today. I'm Ivy, the body relationship coach, and joining me today as my co host is Akilah S. Richards.
So good. So good to be here.
Yes, yes, yes. And just a little background setting for you all. Akilah and I have been connected in kindred souls for like over 15 years now.
Yes, Ivy. Yeah. Seen
So
each
we're
other
not
through a lot of
strangers.
life. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been cultivating this energy and these tools for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. Quite organically, like we have that in common, which so much of what we'll talk about and invite conversation around today is so rooted in like our personal experiences that drive us
Mm.
into collective liberation work, which is really just we both do that type of work because we need it, because we our lives call for it, and I love that we get to watch how it manifests in each other's lives over time, over decade plus five and going.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So when originally we talked about this and collaborated on this, one of the things that came to mind for me was that I know that grief is something that is one of your offerings now, and I'd love to hear from you so that our viewers know a little bit more about you and what you do, and why grief is one of the gifts that you're working helping people with right now.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Hmm.
Um, so I'll start with like about a week ago or whenever that was, Ivy, that we decided, yeah, we're going to do this and have this conversation. I, over the past few years, it's like I can't not notice where there is like untended grief. I can't not see where at the root, or sometimes right there on the fruit, very visible, of what somebody is moving through or what a community is moving through isn't grief. I just couldn't not see it once I began to see it. And my background is as an unschooling organizer, working with families, including my own, to move away from school centric living and a dependency on that particular this corner of the system called schooling, and including young people and teachers and all the different people involved in it. And so that's where my roots as an organizer really formed. And then as I moved through life and experiences and different communities, and my family was nomadic for a while as unschoolers, we lived in different countries, and I just began to have the emotional and communal resources to slow down from being a solopreneur over into focusing on things that weren't about money. And long story short, that led me to seminary, which I spent a year and a summer, and then transitioned into thanatology, which is the study of death, dying, and loss. And it's been probably a couple of years since I've gone down that road and doing hospice volunteering and working with the aging and just seeing how grief is it's such an important part of our mental health, our relationship to our body, and our collective liberation work, our grief literacy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so with talking about what we're navigating right now as a people, we've been navigating this for a few years now in different forms, right?
Yep.
Um, One of the things that made me want to have this conversation is because we know that grief does show up in the body, right? I'm a full believer in taking a holistic perspective of life, and that means mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual, right? So I fully believe that what happens to us, when it comes to our emotional well-being and our mental well-being, that it also impacts our physical well-being. So my work is based around body relationship work, and that is the connection that we have with our body and how that impacts the rest of our well-being, right? And so hearing the call and following the nudge and seeing how things have been playing out in our society, in our world, in our communities, I knew that it was important for us to connect and just create a healing space where we could talk about, what we are feeling in our bodies, or maybe not noticing that we're feeling in our bodies,
Yes.
and the ways in which that is rippling out into the rest of our well-being and the other parts of our lives.
Yes. And I'm so grateful for this conversation because right now, naming, we can go down the list of things that most of us are aware of before we even get to our personal experiences with grief,
Mm,
right? Like grief is such a commonly used word right now because we cannot deny the forms of collective grief that we're experiencing from the political sphere even before a week ago, with the newest US election, speaking in this US context, which is where I am. So a lot of what I'm saying will be from that limited context. Um, but that, and then of course, we know on a broader scale, all that has been happening in, when we talk about Gaza, when we talk about the Sudan, as we continue to learn things, it just, we are all grieving this sense of not being able to change what we know needs to be changed, right? And to feel in these moments like we want to do what we can, which includes sometimes numbing out and blocking out how we're actually feeling and how these experiences are being processed in our bodies and our immune systems and our relationships. Like, this is the time when, if we are not in community about what's going on, we don't do that holistic self-care and holistic communal care that you talk so much about, Ivy. Yeah. So, yeah.
yeah, I love that you started out talking about the fact that it starts with sort of what we're experiencing right in our personal care, because a lot of times we do direct a lot of our energy and our attention externally, and we don't realize how what's going on internally is also impacting external, and vice versa, right? And
Yes.
so having that awareness alone can help us bring in more harmony into our lives.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Because I want to talk here, like, for folks who are watching and listening and tuning in because you were like, oh, it's a body awareness in times of grief. And this is
Hmm.
something that I know I'm experiencing this in my body, or or I suspect that, could it be possible that these things that are newer that are happening with my body are tied to what I'm experiencing in the world around me or in my closer circle, and I don't even realize it. That alone can not only be like a sense of relief in terms of our thinking brain, but also in the body, because sometimes the body, that's the body's alarm,
Yep.
right? To say, in your brain, you might be saying to people and thinking you're telling the truth that you're fine, but you look around in your environment and you feel into your body, and you're not sleeping even more than you tend to not sleep. You are irritable, you are breaking out, and it's not just the perimenopausal, hormonal breakouts. You are experiencing different aches and pains, and you're not realizing that it's tied to what you're seeing on social media each day, and don't have somewhere to process it, because scrolling is not processing. So the
Hmm.
body is alarming us, which is why I'm like, your work now is so important, because we might not be able to fix or solve, because grief isn't fixable or solvable. Neither is everything we deal with in our body, but we can name
Hmm.
it. We can support ourselves and others as we experience it. We can put it in its place sometimes,
Hmm.
feel like, oh my God, I'm going crazy. It's like, no, you're grieving.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also, one of the things I talk about a lot is sometimes we go straight to frustration with the body, right? When all those things start happening, whether it's aches, pains, like you named, breakouts, a lot of times gastrointestinal issues are going,
Yes.
because we're holding it in our bellies and things like
Yes.
that. It can be tension in the neck and the body, back aches and things like that. And a lot of times the first thing we go to is frustration with the body. So, because it's sort of like, what is wrong with you? What are you doing? My body's getting on my nerves.
Yep.
I am passionate about saying sometimes, not always, but sometimes those things, like you said, are signals of the fact that we are carrying that stress or we are carrying that grief in our body and we are not processing it through the cells in our body, right? It's going in
Yes.
and it's staying there and it's seeping down into the cells and into the organs.
Yes.
And yeah.
Yes. And it's stuck up here.
Mm-hmm,
We're
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
reading think pieces, we're writing think pieces,
Mm,
we're here up. And one of the things that showed up for me recently, I've had the rich education of being part of several different types of grief circles over the past couple
mm,
of years. Yo, you want to talk about education? You want to talk about seeing folks in like the real, where you can't front like you're okay. And that stuff is really shaping so much of my perspective on how we communicate and when we don't communicate, and our blockages with like just all different types of division from others, division from parts of ourselves. And one of the things that came up, Ivy, is that there's a way that the body and grief have similar beginnings in terms of when you think about a newer human, like a 2-year old, they they don't have a problem with their bodies. They're not frustrated,
mm,
right? On the messaging comes in, and it's coming in earlier and earlier. But if you are in a safe enough environment, in a healthy enough environment at 2 or 3 and 4, you have no problems with your body. You love it, you get it, you're moving around in it. Similar thing with your grief, just like your joy. If you're upset about something, you're expressing it, you're showing it, you expect people to do something about it, right? And then we get messaged out of being okay with our bodies and also being okay with
mm,
our grief. We think
mm,
maturity is to tuck your grief in, just like beauty is to tuck your stomach in or whatever. But it's
mm,
not to tuck it in for grief. It's to learn how to partner with it. Okay, it's not everybody's problem when I'm grieving, but it is, and it's not something to fix, but how do I move it? How do I work with it? Same thing with my body. I might not like these things on my body. It's not about that. It's how do I move with that? How is that shaping my decisions and my relationship? Right? You see that parallel?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes, yes, yes. So much resonance with that. And one thing that's coming up for me is also thinking about that example that you're giving, also shame, right?
Yes.
How we are taught shame about our bodies early, and we're also taught shame, giving your example about grief early, right? So it's sort of like, suck it up, don't cry, don't,
Yep.
you're a big girl, you're a big boy, you don't have to cry, you're fine. And we learn to
Yes.
stuff, and suck. Yeah, same way with the body, where you were stuffing and sucking and manipulating it to meet other people's
Yes.
standards. And I'm it's resonating when you're talking about grief, how we do the same thing with grief, and we're
That
taught
is
that
it.
shame about it.
That is it. That is it. So when as we join conversations like this, to be able to say, okay, what tools do I have for this then if I do feel like,
Mm,
oh shoot, I am grieving, I am raging. That's one of the ways you can know grief is present. Anger, if you're
Mm,
feeling angry, like I've been in so many different conversations, particularly with Black women, as a result of this election and the
mhm,
diversity of feelings of frustration, about how the election went. And we if there isn't a space to have the conversation about it and go beyond the rage, it's not enough. It has to move into the grief,
mm,
because the anger is evidence of the presence of grief. You
mhm,
are
mhm,
having a tantrum, understandably. And so what then will you do with that? So the what is the part about processing. That's why when you talk about body awareness, having tools, like I'm going to do a shameless plug for
Oh.
the body relationship journal. Oh my God, because we need easy buttons. We need scaffolding to be able
Mhm,
to
mhm,
come back to ourselves. And that's what things like this does. It gives us simple questions, simple prompts, simple invitations to get into the self, in service of the self, and also in service of how you want to show up for the people and the movements and the shit that you believe in. If you are not tending to your grief, if you are not in relationship with your body, you are not available to do the work that you are called to do. You're going to be stuck in the
mhm,
rage and the sadness and not be able to move through it, because your body is like, yeah, but you're not feeling me.
mm. Yeah. And how do we move out of the surface level, the things that are socially acceptable, the things that are even comfortable for us, and get past those things? When we talk about our connection with our body, when we talk about truly processing grief, how do we get past, right, those
Yep.
things that are at the surface?
Yeah, the tuck in, put away, blah, 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 the version of that. Yeah, I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
this
yeah.
question, because that's what I was talking with someone today at a coaching session earlier today, and we were having a similar conversation about getting, like, what do we do when we don't feel like we have enough time, or we don't feel like what are some of the easy things? And I was talking about how for me it's about being less digital, right, and more like
Mhm, mhm,
tapping into my tactile. Like I have my stones, like my rocks
mhm,
all around me. Right, we gotta be with simple things, even when we're going for a walk, if we're picking up leaves, or where it's the idea of kind of mixing up what you typically do to give yourself access to more of yourself, right? There's
mhm,
self that's tuned in to the things, and then there are all these other selves. I talk about the community of one in my coaching. It's like you got a part of you that don't give a shit about the computer. You got a
mhm,
part of you
mhm,
doesn't care about what other people are how other people grieve. There's a part of you that is willing to go to karaoke and sing at the top of their lungs, because even though it doesn't make sense time wise, because you have things to do, it feels good and you're following that. That is an example of grief tending. When you tap into more than your thinky think, you're really inviting the parts of yourself that need tending to, and you're inviting the other parts of yourself that know how to support this version of you, so you don't need to be here all the time.
mhm, mhm. I love how you just ushered us into that space of talking about the parts of yourself that know, right? And that's one of the things that I talk about a lot in like body relationship work. I truly believe that we have a knowing, and it's returning to that knowing, especially when it comes to caring for our bodies and
Yes.
listening to our bodies and trusting our intuition and those things. And so, again, parallel with grief and the body, it is really allowing ourselves to tap back into that knowing, and listening to what you're saying about how we can be so tuned into the external, which again, I have this conversation a lot about our relationship with our body
Mm-hmm.
as well, that you got to turn down the dial on the external, right? And turn up the dial on your internal and pay more attention to the things that are going on, within your body, within your mind, within your spirit. And that's really where you start to return to the knowing,
Yes.
right? Because as long as you're tuned into and tapped into everybody
Yep.
else's opinions, everybody else's um emotions, and sometimes we don't realize how tuned in we are, right? But if all day you're scrolling, or you're moving the mouse, and you spend so much time listening to everyone else, but you're only spending a fraction of that time listening to yourself, then of course that belief is going to be, have deeper, right, on the
Yes.
other end. But when you start spending more time with yourself, and you change the balance of it,
Yes.
right, and you spend more time with your own knowing, and you say, okay, I do know, right, start slowing down and listening. It's like, oh, I do understand, I am feeling these things, and it can be scary. And I think that's one of the things too that we can talk about, and I'd love to hear from you about that from a perspective of a person who specializes in grief. But sometimes it can be scary. We don't want to feel those feelings. So sometimes that's why we stay at the
Yeah.
surface, because those feelings are scary. They're unfamiliar, especially if we've done the stuffing and the
Yep.
numbing and the running away from
Yep.
that stuff for, a very long
Yeah,
time.
totally. I everything you're saying, and shout out to Lou who's saying, yeah, we gotta sit in it, right? That's what
Mm,
it is, and that is actually a coping strategy to you can even
mm,
schedule time to say, as wild as it might sound, it is an effective coping strategy for many to say, all right, on Wednesdays and Saturdays, I'm going to give myself the space from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock because I work late or whatever, or those are my days off, to let myself go through the grief, to let myself watch the video that I didn't want to watch before. If it's a personal loss, to pull out the photos that I know are going to make me cry, right, to give yourself the time to set up that brave space to spend some time with it, because these are like biological processes. Grief is not like a disease or a disorder or something that you can fix and change. It's an experience, and it can also be a skill set when you talk about grief tending. So if it's a skill, then it means it has practices, things you can do to become more practiced,
mm,
to become more comfortable with it, to be able to draw on it easier and sooner. And one of those things is to give yourself scheduled time to sit in the grief of something. Oh my God, I wish I could donate more. Oh my God, I wish people would understand this thing. I'm gonna make a playlist, and I'm gonna listen to these 4 sad songs, and I'm gonna let myself just whatever grief means to me. Maybe it's movement, maybe it's crying, maybe it's running, maybe it's eating a pizza. It's like whatever it is for you, give yourself the space to do that. That's one way, because what you're doing also kind of low key is, again, giving yourself an opportunity to learn how more parts of you handle things, and not just the part that's trying to fix or solve or put away.
mm, mm. I'm processing
I know
that.
you're gonna say that.
Yeah.
That's Ivy's
Yeah.
personal process.
I'm processing that. Yeah, I try to help my community get more used to that, because I do think that's one of the things we're used to, like, okay, and next, sort of moving. And sometimes we do, this goes along with the topic, we need that time to, like, let's breathe through something and let it settle in,
Yes.
and take a
Don't
moment.
be afraid
Yeah.
of that. I talk about savoring. I call myself a savorist, because it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's to just
Yeah.
be like, to savor all the things, to slow down, to be silent, to let it freaking breathe. Like, it's okay. It's okay.
Mhm. 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 One of the things that is also coming up for me is that how the things that bring us joy, right? And the things that bring us pleasure can also help usher us through the journey of
Yeah.
grief. And not in a way of trying to escape it,
Yeah.
right? But ushering us through the processing of it. Um, because a lot of times we think that those things are antipodal,
Yep.
right? Like, okay, well, joy and pleasure is over here, grief is over here, and never
Yeah.
the two shall meet. But it's like, no, they actually can walk hand
They
in
do.
hand with each
Yeah.
other.
They go together
Mm-hmm.
the same way. This my sister
Mm-hmm.
Thea Monier, who talks a lot about joy. We were
Mm-hmm.
talking about this the other day about how the same way that it really like I really understood it, I'd heard it many times, but for some reason in thanatology school is where it just is like, oh, like life and death go together. The minute you are given life, you are also given death. It's a guarantee. And it's the very same
Mm-hmm.
thing with joy and grief. There's joy at varying extents in relation to birth, even when the birth or the circumstances of the birth are not consensual. Whoever is bringing that person in, oftentimes, more time, as we said, there's joy, right? And then inevitably there is grief. So if we can remember that and remember that the division is actually really inorganic, very bizarre, very abnormal, then we can say, oh, I can, the same way that I have this voracious appetite for joy, maybe, because we don't always, but the same way I can welcome joy, I also need the practice of grief. I am, the older I get, the more grief I'm going to experience. And so therefore,
Mm-hmm.
I want the practice. I want to not be able to turn away when I'm seeing something horrific happening somewhere. Doesn't mean I'm going to wallow in it and overfeed myself. I'm going to discern, because that's what grief tending helps you to do, to discern. I'm not trying to look away because this shit is happening in the world and it matters to me. But if I'm grief tending, then I'm saying, yes, but I don't need to engage it every day. And I also need to do something about how I want to feel. You know, that's my question. How do you want to feel?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
following, if I'm going to be on social media, then I'm following people who are not just talking about the division, but talking about what they're doing. Or maybe I'm
Mm-hmm.
following comedians because I just need to laugh in between the things. I'm, just like, what do I need and how much can I ride for what I need, and try not to judge myself about what I should be doing, because that's more schoolish fixaholic fronting idea that the more busy I am, the more frustrated I am, the more productive and effective I am. Grief will have you thinking that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I also wanted to, if you're comfortable, sharing with our viewers in our community, is our own individual experiences with grief, maybe, and something that we can share with the community, that have been our experiences and our lessons, and some of the practices, rituals, tools that we have used to navigate grief in our lives.
Yeah. Yes.
Mhm.
And did you want to share something for starters, or do you want me to?
Um, I'll let you go first.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there are plenty of
Yeah.
experiences. So one of the things that I teach a course called I Let It Die. So the acronym is
Mm,
ILID, the eyelid course, and that came through me as a result of some experiences in 2019 where I saw really clearly that a version of me needed to die. And so I had a
mhm,
funeral for her and I invited family. So my partner and my daughters were at that funeral. And as a result of that, I really, it was like a rebirth. I don't know if that sounds dramatic, but it was like a rebirth. And I realized that the big transformation was that I let something die, like I pronounced that version of me dead. And I needed that so much because in the years since 2019 up until now, two particular things with family members close to me, my brother and my grandmother, who got life altering diagnoses. And I can just say a little bit about my grandmother's is that it's Alzheimer's. And as for folks who are familiar with it, you know how rapid a shift it can be. It was like that December, she was like reciting stuff at her church and getting a standing ovation. And then by the middle of January, she was like, wait, what? Who? Can't see from like just I and she raised me while my parents were in the US, so I grew up with her before I moved to the US and moved with my mother. So she is another mother to me. And to watch her be conscious, because she has lots of moments of lucidity, to watch her experience herself diminish
Mm-hmm.
and to be short term just for that 1 week part of her caregiving team, bathing her, medication management, going from who we call Queen Mavis, who when you're coming over, she cooking and she doing the things, to something very different. And watching her experience that, that rocked me, that changed me, that showed me that I really needed to get more practice with managing this sort of grief. And in the eyelid course, we talk about non-body deaths, the type of griefs that we experience that's not about someone's death, but about so many aspects of being alive and experiencing endings and deaths, little d deaths of all kinds.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. I know that your grandmother is such a significant part of you and who you are and what you do,
Yep.
and in a lot of ways lives through you, through your work. So,
Thank you, Ivy. Yeah.
mm.
Yeah. What about you?
For me, it was. I love that you gave language to this because it was actual experience of physical death, which for me was my grandmother. And then it was my own non-body death. That's the language that you gave to it,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
So, my grandmother transitioned in 2020,
I remember.
and she and my grandfather have been there since the beginning. Like my mother even tells stories of when she was pregnant, she went to stay with them for a few weeks, and my grandfather, drove her to the hospital, and they've just always been a part of my life. So, um, she transitioned in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it was starting the pandemic with grief, right? And then going into a community pandemic and all the things that are going on global, at the same time. And just one thing that I realized in relation to what we're talking about tonight is that at that time, I felt like I didn't have time to grieve her because it was like all the things are going on. This was March 2020, which was like the same time that we're also going into a lot of things happening socially and shut
Yeah.
down and all of that. So it just didn't feel like there was time to pause. Um, and I remember coming back to it, right? A year or two later and really giving myself a chance to go through my own process of honoring her and mourning her and connecting with her. And a lot of that showed up for me. And that's where my love for plants came in. That's where
Yes.
my work with the herbs, which is another way of loving plants, came through. And just realizing that, like, that connection, and my actual healing process and grieving process was doing these different activities and kind of letting myself move through it in a slow way. And I also unplugged from social media and work and things like that for a
Yeah.
while, just to finally give myself a chance in 2021 to be like, okay, we need to sit down and feel this. Um, And the second thing for me, which was a non-body death, was recently going through um, my chronic illness um, experience that I had with my thyroid, right? And although I live with PCOS, which is a chronic illness that I've lived with for over 20 something years, it was different for me to go through this experience because it was like I had an expectation of what I thought things were going to be and
Yep.
what I wanted them to be. And then moving through that grief of it's not going to be that
That is
way.
it.
Right. And so there was that intersection of my relationship with my body and also grief at the same time of releasing that body that I thought I was going to be experiencing. And this, a lot of times we talk about that in relation to weight or size or beauty. And it was none of that. For me, it was just, I wasn't expecting to be going through this experience, right? With this particular part of my body. And just like releasing it and being like, okay, I wanted it to be
Yeah.
this way. It's not going to be
Yes.
this way. And like you said, coming back from that, a completely different person. I'm not the same person after that, but for the better.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for sharing that
Yeah.
because it's so important that we presence
Mm-hmm.
the non-body deaths. That's one of the things that we learn to um, devalue and say, well, no, that's not a thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, yes, yes, it is. Expectation, the an expectation unmet is a point of grief. And it doesn't have to be big old G
Mm-hmm.
grief, but it's still, these things
Mm-hmm.
affect us. When you talk to folks in the medical fields, one of in the medical field, one of the benefits of the stanatology school, because you know I'm Rockwood School, so if I'm there, then you know I needed to, and it was so incredible because we learned from a lot of basically like ER doctors and nurses and people who were like in the throes of when grieving is happening while there's still all these other, and they're very aware
Mm-hmm.
biological, chemical and physical elements of grief. And really, if we don't tend to it, it's the body is immediately punished in so many ways. And the body has
Mm-hmm.
built in mechanisms, like even tears. One of the things that I learned is that we cry different, we have different types of tears. There's the one that's like an
Yeah.
irritant, like if you're chopping an onion or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there's just like regular moisture. And then the one from like weeping actually has things in it that are like endorphins, right? Like just these ways where
Mm-hmm.
it's like we are built just as we are built for aspects of joy. We are built actually
Mm-hmm.
to grieve. It's a type of digestion, if you will, right? It's a type of processing that is not something to be fixed. It is like a long-term partner that comes with the gift of life. It's loss, and
Mm-hmm.
then the grieving of that loss, or I like to say that grief is how we savor loss, right? And it's how we're saying there's something here that I loved or valued or appreciated that brought me joy, and the absence of it is in my grief rituals. So we have to give ourselves the opportunity to, as you use the word, slow. And that's important. That is another strategy for coping with grief, to do whatever you do in your day slower. Just that simple thing invites again more of you. You'll notice what's comforting. You'll notice more easily when you get irritated, right? It's like slower means you're building in the pauses to be able to check in and discern, not just for yourself, but also for other people, to say, oh, yeah, so she told me about this thing. And because I'm not rushing, I'm realizing, I'm making the connection and thinking, oh, she might be grieving. Like, how much more compassion might we offer when we approach a thing like, yo, everybody in this room is grieving something right now. Not necessarily the death of a person, but maybe that. whether it's a person they know or not, but all these other unmet expectations, abrupt endings, endings that even needed to happen. All of those things are things that we need to make the time to grieve, to check in to see how it's affecting us. Did it feel like a hit, or is it not a big deal? Because it might feel like a hit and you didn't realize it. So you're taking that out on other things in your life.
Whew. Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
One of the things, another thing that came up for me when you were talking about this is, and I think it also was an extension of what when we were talking about illness in the body and those things. And what I do remember for me was the loss of power, or the feeling of the loss of
Mm,
power, and how a lot of what was bringing up frustration and resistance was, I don't feel like I have any sort of power in this situation, right? I feel powerless. And how that brought so much pain and disconnection and all of those things within my body, between my body and my spirit and my mind, just feeling like life was happening
yeah,
to me and I was not in any way empowered in the situation. And in thinking about that, then there was this connection of like how we experience that in grief, right? And how the people who may be watching this might be experiencing that with what's going on in our world and in society and in the globe, and how that all comes together, that feeling of
yeah.
powerlessness and feeling disempowered around
Yes, yes.
grief.
And I love what Lou is saying here too. It's like compassion for ourselves, and compassion for others, knowing others are also experiencing, yes, exactly, some kind of grief. Because to
Hmm.
exactly to
Hmm.
what you said, Ivy, it's like we're experiencing this in these ways, and having the experience in our bodies, and the knowledge of that, the knowing of that is the opportunity, again, not to fix it. When we talk about a healing space, we're not talking about healing from grief. We're talking about healing from unnecessary suffering, from not having the grief tending
Hmm.
skills. So an example of the body, I know for me, again, as somebody who is going through perimenopause, and being a black woman in a system that doesn't, the medical system doesn't really value women's bodies the same. Heard one doctor say women's bodies are treated like little men, in terms of like, not, they don't really have a lot of real knowledge about how our systems work, because they're a lot more complex than a male body. And then on top of that, I'm a black woman, so the very valid threats to the safety of my body inside of that system. So that sense of powerlessness, my recent experience with that is trying to figure out what's happening hormonally, and like, okay, do I need estrogen? Do I need progesterone? Should I be doing testosterone or DHEA? What does that even mean? How much do I, like, I've had to take the last 4 or 5 months to become, like a stage one hormones expert, and tracking all of the things, and reading about the menopause society and the menopause and the language, and finding a menopause certified doctor, and having my body at 47 do very different things that it did at even like 45, and having invisible illnesses that also impact what I could be diagnosed with and not, right? Like the level of endometriosis, the fibroid tumors that continue to plague, the fact that my uterine volume is like 3 times the normal. There are so many opportunities for me to feel like just, it doesn't even, I feel powerless. But as a grief
Hmm.
tender,
Hmm.
I'm able to check in with that and say, okay, I have days where I go in and I pull out all my hormone books. And then I have other days where don't even talk to me about any of that. I'm going to do it slow. I'm gonna trust that what I know now is enough for now. I'm going to, just these are ways that we tend to grieve. We don't put it away. We say, what can I do from wherever, whatever I'm feeling now? And grief is not something that you can support in a wrong way. Whatever you do, grief tending is
Mm-hmm.
specific to the person. And you can be in any
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
stage of grief at any time. It's not like this. It's like this. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very, we keep, it's like this parallel again to our relationship with the body, right? Where it's like no two bodies are
Hmm.
are the same. And not even every day with the body is the
Exactly.
same, right? And I like to say all the time, it's like the thing that has saved me, and I love to share with people, is energy management, right? Like realizing what your energy is for that day, sometimes that moment, and then spending that energy in a way that serves you, right? And that's not going to be, you and I don't have the same energy. Me and
The same
myself don't
energy
have the
in the
same
same
energy every
day, even in
day.
the same day,
In the
right?
same,
Yeah, like
yes,
I might start
yes,
out in one place
yes.
and then something very different happens. And it's just
Hmm.
this is why I go back to, like, like in a woman identifying body, and in terms of the things that we experience and how we are built in a certain way, in terms of what our body actually does to process emotions.
Hmm.
We really, the sense of responsibility and care for the whole self must include understanding what happens to your specific body when you grieve, when you are
Hmm.
grieving, to understand that about
Hmm.
yourself
Hmm.
by slowing down, by paying attention to when you're irritable. It doesn't have to be detailed tracking, just sporadic. If you journal, add to your journal those elements of, like, your mood, or what's happening with your skin or your hair, because these are all the body's brilliant way of saying, hey, I don't want you to have to figure it all out. I'm going to give you a bunch of clues. Thank you, body, for holding me down like this, because I will overthink or underthink. I don't need to Google it. My hair is thinning. So some of that might be hormonal, some of that might be stress, and a part of the stress and the hormone shifts might be related to what I'm not giving myself the space to say, that hurt, that's a loss. I grieve that,
Hmm.
even though I needed to end that thing, or even though she was pissing me off, still she's absent now. And a part of me feels a way about that, and I'm gonna let that live. I'm gonna sit in it, as Lou said. I'm gonna let myself do that sometimes and see how that's showing up in my body, and what did I do that offered me a little relief. Because again, we cannot fix grief, but the suffering around it, that and the beating up of our bodies, instead of appreciating that the body is giving us signals so that it can continue to live, then we
Hmm.
can do it
Hmm.
different.
It really is
It is.
that communication with the body.
Yes. And to trust it, right? Like, again, that's what we've been taught, that the body is like betraying us, because we didn't want this. And it's like, no, it is responding to what's happening in the environment, inner and outer, and it's doing its very best. Um, and I and that matters to me. I'm going to see my body as a part of my support system where I can, which doesn't
Hmm.
mean I love all
Hmm.
the things about it, but I know it's doing the
Hmm.
best that it can. And it is a part of my community of one, this body that I get to be with in this way. And it wants to survive. It wants to, and that's why
Hmm.
it's telling me things. And the problem isn't my body. It's like the communication, it's the freaking system, it's all these other things that the body is dealing with too.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and that communication is a two-way street, which a lot of people don't maybe don't know or not aware of, is that your body talks to you, but you also talk to your body, right? So when you have your body signals is the language that I use, right? So when we're talking about thirst, when you feel tired, like you said, when your hair is behaving a certain way, when you're feeling aches or pains, or even in the ways where you feel
Yes.
pleasure and you feel good feelings, you feel
Yes.
tingles going down your spine, and that's your body communicating to you. And you communicate back to your body by how you respond to
Mm.
those signals, right? So when your body gives you the signals, if you ignore them, mute them, maybe don't even appreciate them or show gratitude, then that is you actually communicating back
Yeah.
to the body, right? It's your way of talking back to your
Yes.
body. So when you do, like we're talking about, when you slow down, when you take your time, when you set aside the time and say, okay, let me just sit, check in with my body, let me just breathe. How are my toes feeling, how are my legs feeling, how is my back feeling? Those are times when you're taking an assessment of your body and you're listening for, are there any signals coming to me, because I've been really busy today, or I've been really busy this week, and I don't think I've checked in with my body. And a lot of times we don't do the check-in until the body's
Exactly.
screaming at us,
Meanwhile,
right?
it's
Which
been
is when
doing
we're
this the
like,
whole time. It's been like, Akilah,
yeah.
Ivy, like it's been doing that because usually, right? I imagine this you experience this often, and I know I experience this in coaching. That part is usually not mysterious. It's like, oh, where's it showing up in your body? Brrrah.
Mm,
Like we could just that part is usually not so mysterious. You absolutely have been feeling the
mhm,
nudge,
mhm,
but sometimes we put it away because we need to, real talk, in that moment. But the
mhm,
problem
mhm,
is
mhm,
we don't come back to it. And then not only do we not come back to it,
mm.
it's like we beat ourselves up for having the symptoms of it, uh, right? Like
Yes,
and
yes.
the body. And so it's like again the magic, the freaking alchemy of being present with the body is like a portal for so much other type of mindfulness work, because it's like our body is craving the attention, like, oh my god, finally.
Mhm,
Right, I've seen so many memes like that and so many beautiful quotes about the body being relieved when we realize that we're in this
mhm.
mutual, we're in a conversation, like how Angelou talks about
Yeah.
prayer and meditation. It's like, yeah, the body's conversation
Mhm,
and yours to it, not just through food and all the other things that we hear about all the time, but how how we respond to what is happening. Even if I can't address the
yep.
ache, I can say, which I literally do, I feel that my shoulder's doing that because I was lifting those stupid weights because I gotta lift weights now and blah 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 blah. It's like a different conversation with the body is what we can do to slow ourselves down and to tap into how grief and how stress is affecting our bodies, and what can we do to be in a healthier, different relationship by communicating differently with our bodies. Like I will say to my body, okay, I'm gonna do this thing because I don't want to, but I know you can't do it if I don't do it. Like you need me to move my legs because I need to do the things and I need to stimulate the hormone and the right. Like I will have that conversation with my body and say, I'm doing this
Mhm.
for you. And for me, it helps. I write songs to my body. A lot of my coaching clients know this because I need to do that. It needs to be ritual. It needs to be ceremony in a sense,
Mhm,
because that's what it takes, that
mhm.
radical level of attention and care for me to begin to normalize a healthier relationship and communication. That's what it takes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I thought I was the only one who talked out loud to my body But I'll, especially if it gets, my tummy gets to grump, because I'll be sitting here at the desk like tap 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 tap, and my stomach gets to grump. I'm like, okay,
Yes.
I'm coming. I'm gonna give you some food. I will say it out
Yes.
loud, like, because I'm like, I know,
Yes.
it's happening. We're gonna go eat in
Yes.
just a second. Give me just a second, because it really is like, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna
Yes.
go
And
get
it
some food,
matters. It
and it,
matters.
because it's like acknowledging that connection,
Yes.
that
Yes,
relationship.
and to push
Yeah,
back against,
yeah.
again, the stuff we talked about at the top of this, that othering of the body and the separation. It's like, no, this is a part of me. So if I'm gonna have a holistic
Mhm.
approach, then my communication isn't just
Mhm.
to my
Mhm.
doctors and to my, you know, whatever yoga. No, it's also to the versions of me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know we're
Hmm.
getting ready to wrap up. I'd love to hear, I had a few things I wanted to share, and I'd love to hear if you had any tools that you'd like to give the audience that are your, like maybe any favorite go-tos of things that they can do that are
Yeah.
accessible practices that they can use to move through grief, to process grief through their body, or even just
Yes,
stress.
absolutely. Easy, easy. If you're watching this, I know you have a level of internet access. So just going on YouTube and typing in how grief affects the body, that alone can send you down a beautiful rabbit hole of information that you can then really think about that for yourself, for the people that you are around, and what is happening. Because really, any little tool for awareness between your body and grief. So that's one resource that I would recommend. Um, and then I'm also on Instagram, Radical Selfie, slowly, surely talking a lot more about what I'm learning as a dedicated grief tender. Yeah.
Thank you. For me, I definitely wanted to share, and I'll also, if you're not following me, please do make sure you get on my newsletter list. I send all kinds of tools, practices, rituals there. So I'll definitely be sending more to my community. But consider ancestral connection, storytelling, having dialogue and conversation with others. These are things that are just accessible, right? You don't have to spend a lot of money, you don't have to do a lot of schooling. Um, Moving that energy through your body through gentle movement or even joyful movement. And don't forget the value of just stillness, right? Because sometimes we talk about movement, doing this, talking, all that, but sometimes it can also be in stillness, especially if you tend to have that personality where you do a lot of movement all the time or you're busy all the time. Sometimes you need something different like stillness.
Absolutely.
So
Yes, yes.
we love having you all here with us this evening. And if you're watching the replay, how can people get in touch with you,
So
Akilah?
I'm at Radical Selfie on Instagram, and Substack is my other current love. The Savor Complex, SAVOR, and also patreon.com/Akilah. I call that my church. That's where all the things that I do lives. And I also must say quickly, grief is not a solo job. Unlike so many other types of
Hmm.
work, the isolation, the more isolated you want to be, the more you need to be in community so that you can process your grief. I had to say that part.
Yes, yes. Communal healing and community connection.
Yes, vital for grief tending, not a solo job.
Hmm. 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 I feel like that's why it was so important for us to get together tonight and today to do a community version
Yeah,
of this conversation. And sometimes it is just having the conversations, storytelling, which we also did, sharing this is what worked for me, this is what I'm experiencing, the other person, it's the
yeah,
reciprocity of it all. And there's so much healing and empowerment and clarity that shows up in those
absolutely. That's
spaces.
how we do this get together, where they say where two or more are gathered. Right. We need it. Yeah.
Yes.
So thank y'all for being here. Thank you for those who are here right in this moment. And also people who are watching. It's beautiful that you're investing in your education around grief in your body, because you need that for how you can manage yourself safe enough, Yeah.
Yes. And I also want to give gratitude and show love to
Yes.
Yesenia, who's helping us
Thank
do
you,
all of
Yesenia. We
our
needed you.
do all of our tech goodness in the background. And Yesenia, you can put your information up there. Also follow Yesenia. Um,
Yes, yes,
Lots
Yesenia.
of art healing through movement, through art. Yes, my double X fly, all kinds of goodness over there, and activism. And I definitely wouldn't have anybody in this space that wasn't bringing healing energy. So it's saying is back there, bringing healing energy in our tech space too. So thank you all so much for being a part of this. Be sure to check the description for all our offerings and gifts that we have for you, so you can also stay connected to our community and you don't have to do this
Yes,
alone.
yes. Peace and love, y'all.
Yes.
Thank